Hi, I'm Trevi's Side, and this is my review of Remedy's Control. I will have no regard for spoilers, so watch at your own risk if you haven't played the game, or don't want to be spoiled in general. I've played Control knowing nothing about the game, having only seen the first reveal trailer back at E3 2018, but had forgotten about it by the time I started the game. I didn't know the game was going to feature paranormal stuff. Having no interest of my own in the matter made it refreshing to see a topic that I haven't seen in games before. Not in this way, at least. I enjoyed the game and thought it was quite fun. The setting is interesting and made me curious about its secrets. The gameplay felt tight and good to play in general. That said, there are some aspects of the game I would consider detrimental to the overall experience, as well as unfocusing the game as a whole, trying to jam extraneous elements in a game that did not need them. For starters, the side quests detracted a little from the game. Maybe having it be more linear would have helped it. Linear in terms of story. If we're talking about the explorable map that follows a Metroidvania style of progression, I think it's great, but that may just be me. I really like the feeling of discovering the map with closed-off areas that can only be accessed later, or if you're ingenious enough to find a way in. Some side quests do offer some varied encounters and specific situations not found in the main story. The mirror one, for example, was pretty good, albeit a bit short, or the anchor boss fight, which had me fail several times before managing to beat it. But most of them feel like busy work, just to squeeze in those few extra hours of gameplay. There is a type of side quest that pops out for a limited time only, which is clearly only filler for the game. They are always in an area you're not currently in, and from what I've seen, the only thing you're asked to do is go somewhere and kill a bunch of enemies. I avoided doing them because I didn't want to go to a different area and stop what I was doing at the moment for some lame reward. The other side quests are also bad. The fact that they're procedurally generated gives them no identity whatsoever, making them, once again, seem like busy work instead of worthwhile content. Yes, they do give you upgrades for your weapons and character, but I think that's where the problem lies. I don't think a game like this needed to have this kind of progression system. If you already have a Metroidvania style of level design, why not incorporate it fully and reward the players who take the time to explore the world you created with straight up power-ups, instead of giving me crafting materials that admittedly do have cool and interesting names, but in the end are crafting materials like any other game. The way it is now makes it feel like fabricated progression. As it stands now, looking for secret areas only ever rewards you with a crate that has randomized loot inside, which is 90% of the time worse than what you already have equipped. So why am I even bothering exploring every nook and cranny? Talking about progression. The map only gives you a rough idea of how the game world is structured. It's very hard to read, especially on multiple levels of elevation. But I think they did this on purpose. I think they wanted players to actually look around the world, taking it all in, and actually learn and remember how it's all laid out, therefore immersing them more into the game and the world. This has the side effect of not labeling anything in any meaningful way. The map only tells you the name of each area, the location of control points and elevators, and roughly how it all connects together. More importantly, what it fails to show you is where locked doors are, the ones that need a clearance level badge to get through, which is their way of limiting players' progression. Which makes re-exploring old areas a little annoying because it's really hard to remember which numbers were on which doors and where the doors were actually located. They probably wanted players to really remember where everything was, but despite the nice art direction and graphics, areas do blend together a little, making it a little hard to tell places apart just from memory. Once I got clearance level 5 for example, I honestly couldn't remember if I've ever even seen a level 5 door, and even if I did, I would have had no idea as to where it was located, leaving me with the only choice of replaying through the whole map just to check whether there were new areas I could access. The same thing goes for the so-called mold areas that are only accessible once you progress through a certain quest. I can see what they wanted to go for with such a basic map, but they might have gone overboard with it. Luckily though, it's not hard at all to get around the map. Even if paths to different places are hard to read on the map, they're easily legible in the actual world, which is conveniently full of signs that tell you in which direction everything is, making it really hard to get lost. This, again, I think goes to show even more how the developers wanted players to just look around the actual world to find their way around, instead of relying on a map. The map is also not in a menu. It's completely accessible while traversing the world, but it does cover up a pretty big portion of the screen, so yeah, I think it's pretty clear they did not want players to keep it up at all times, while still not have them go through the pain of opening up a menu every time they wanted to remember in which direction they were supposed to go. Talking about signs, I really like the attention to detail they put in them. Not only directional ones, but also any other item with legible text on it, as well as object placement used for environmental storytelling. It all adds to the charm and believability of the world. At the beginning of the game, there was some talk about shifting rooms and whole sectors moving around, so I was expecting the game to actually deliver on that and have you try really hard to find your way around the oldest house. But that never happened. I mean, yeah, there's some weird architecture and some rooms do shift a bit, but I was expecting more like whole rooms disappearing and ending up somewhere else, and that never happened. Seems like a waste to hint at it so much if you're not going to deliver on it. Something I really do love is the art style, the imagery, the astral plane with its inverted pyramid, infinite white and black rock platforms, or the motel. I also really like the artistic direction in the 60s or 70s Federal Bureau style. Even if I don't know what came first, the idea that the oldest house won't allow newer technology in, or just the fact that they wanted to have a certain style for the game, it's great that they managed to make it work in the narrative as well. The presentation for the game is also pretty good. The UI is non-intrusive, aside from mission reminders, which thankfully can be turned off, along with any other UI elements. I really love the pop-up for each new major area, along with its low-hitting drum. I also noticed that they made heavy use of color correction to give different areas their own identity, which can seem like a cheat way of doing that, but I personally don't mind that much. The environment is extremely destructible, which works really well with the fact that you're gonna have gunfights all throughout the game and the oldest house. Using your powers to fight against enemies as well as shooting them, you won't have much regard for what damage you're causing to the environment, so it's really cool once it's all over to look around and see all the destruction you've caused. The fact that you don't have to find ammo for your guns or any kind of resource for your abilities works well in my opinion. It avoids having to constantly look for them in the game, and avoids the problem of having so much ammo towards the late game to just not even care anymore and blasting your way through. Balancing the game around the fact that you have unlimited ammo and abilities probably works better. It also prevents players from not using certain abilities or weapons in fear of running out of them. This is sadly somewhat detracted from with those damn crafting resource and weapon mods and personal mods. I would have maybe preferred to have set upgrades that could be found in the world, and only a handful of slots you could put them in, so you still had to choose what kind of build you wanted, but remove the randomness of their effectiveness. And I gotta say that even after being done with the game, the combat still felt good, and using your telekinesis ability never got old. It's not particularly deep, but it's still rewarding, and works well for this kind of shooter. What you do most of the time is balance your ammo resource and your energy resource, using them in tandem, trying not to completely run out of either one. I didn't use the seize ability very much. It took a little too long to gain control over an enemy, and I know there is a mod to speed it up, but I felt like the other mods I had equipped were more valuable, so I just refrained from seizing enemies. Plus, I like the feeling of being the only one against a horde of enemies and still finding my way out on top. The service weapon design is really cool, and the idea of it being like one of those legendary weapons like Excalibur and like was a nice touch, tying back to the lore and world building of the game. But all the different kinds of weapons aside from the default one are not very good from a gameplay perspective. I may be missing something, but after trying them out, the one that feels the most effective is always the default one, which is also the most versatile one. Not making you waste bullets because they spray like with a spin, or being a little situational like the charge, which should work like a grenade, right? You throw it at a cluster of enemies to get rid of them easily, but the thing is, those almost never occur, so you're just better off offing them one by one, and use your telekinesis with big objects if you need to. The shatter also really only works at close range, but at that point you might as well use your melee attack. Plus, only being able to have two equipped at any given moment, and having to go through a menu to equip a different one, really makes you want to not even bother using anything else, since the one you have is already working just fine. Once you're done with the main story, there's the post-game, which I would define as simply fine. It throws some stuff to do at you in case you enjoyed the gameplay so much and wanted a little more, and lets you finish anything you might have left behind while playing the game. The thing is, it relies on side quests, which, as I said before, aren't particularly good. Moving on to the story now. The voice acting and overall quality of the facial motion capture seems a little off for some reason. Character models look very good and pretty realistic, but once you're in a cutscene with characters speaking, their mouths and faces look very weird, almost falling in uncanny valley territory, as well as having awkward pauses between sentences when there's some back and forth in the dialogue. I did get used to it by the end, but it was kind of jarring at first for some reason. I also think that the chatter random NPCs have, which is almost always seemingly written to be comical and funny, despite maybe getting a little chuckle out of me once in a while, is not a great fit for the game.
You guys didn't bring like checkers or anything, did you?
Any active duty security personnel found engaging in non-sanctioned leisure activities will be relieved of duty pending review, sir.
You could have just said no.
The serious tone the rest of the game goes for is detracted from by these latter moments. I'm not saying serious games can't have their moments of hilarity, just that all things considered here, I think it doesn't really fit. Maybe it's just the style of humor that they went with that's not the most appropriate. With Control, Remedy decided to tell the story in a non-intrusive way, maybe to detach themselves from the very story-heavy Quantum Break. They did this in the form of these bureau files, letters and such scattered around the game. Nothing new per se, but I really like the idea of redacting parts of documents. It fits the theme of a top-secret bureau, as well as enhancing the unknown nature of what's happening and what has happened, with all these strange and magical paranormal objects that they're studying. I hate to do this, but it does remind me of From Software games, where the story or lore is told in indirect ways. But while FromSoft manages to be mysterious and letting you, the player, figure things out by piecing the puzzle pieces together from fragmented information, this way of blocking out text that apparently seems deliberate seems cheap in comparison. Like they're trying to take a shortcut to get the same effect on how the game reached in a more natural and interesting way. But in the end, I think it works well, as I said, with the theme of a top-secret classified bureau. Like Leopardi and many other authors have already said and discussed, what we don't know is infinitely more beautiful than what is known, for the simple fact that our minds can imagine beauty unparalleled by the real world. If we knew what the redacted parts said, we can only be let down, and the aura of mystery that they emanate would be lost. After Quantum Break, with its very long live-action cutscenes that basically functioned almost as a TV series to tie in the story of the game, Remedy decided to maybe cut this down to more digestible cutscenes, still retaining the live-action element for some of them. I think it works really well to depict the usage of old video recorders, tying back to the fact that the oldest house doesn't allow newer technology, which would have also been harder to show in engine, probably. Still, Darling's tapes are extremely charming, and I really like the character, building up anticipation as to how his in-game model would have looked compared to the actor in real life. Even though the further I got into the game, the more I started to think that he might actually be dead, which was a little sad. Even more so because I was right. And just like all the bureau files, these cutscenes are not forced on your throat. You can either watch them or just ignore them if you're more interested in just shooting some baddies and progress to the game. Yeah, you can skip cutscenes in pretty much any game, but this way of doing it is better, I think. And I really liked this aspect of the game, so I read and watched everything I could find to learn more about this world. In terms of story, what actually happens after you start the game, I gotta say that it's pretty underwhelming. It starts in medias res, with you the player not doing anything, having to learn as you go, what happened to this place, what needs to be done, and who's who. It's intriguing at first, and right up until the end, I was hoping for it to throw a curveball at me and surprise me in some way, but sadly it's a pretty by-the-numbers story, albeit with some cool concepts and unique takes that I personally have not seen much before. I did enjoy the ending credits fake out, but it came out of left field and felt a little out of place. If they were at a place in the story where the credits could have conceivably started rolling, it would have worked much better, but as it is now, you could really tell the game wasn't done and couldn't possibly be done. In the moment, I genuinely thought that if they were real, there would still be some game left afterwards anyways to tie up any loose ends, which still happens, but it has a little more closure now. The whole story can be summed up like this. Director Trench opens up a portal that lets the Hiss in, believing them to be the solution to something. The Hiss takes over, starting with him. With the director dead, you become director. You fight the Hiss through the oldest house, while also searching for Dylan. You find him, but he's taken over by the Hiss. You go find the object of power that started all this. The Hiss tries to take over you, but you're very strong because you're the protagonist and manage to end it. I know I skipped over some parts, but this is basically it. Everything else is just other stuff thrown in to make it more interesting. I just wished it was a little better, and went a little deeper, seeing how strong it started out. And as I said before, the world building and lore of the game are phenomenal, and I read every file I could get my hands on, just to learn that much more about it, but in terms of what actually happens, I'm let down. Now for a couple of things I didn't know where to put. Contacting and talking with the board is a very interesting concept. What I think that we're going for is a form of non-verbal communication that works in a telepathic way, or a phone call, as it is shown in-game. That's why the board is not voiced, but since it's a non-standard or even human form of communication, it needs to be explained to players exclusively via subtitles, which always have some concepts that are explained by two words with similar or sometimes even different meaning. Here I think they wanted to depict the way sometimes even human languages have words or concepts that are untranslatable, needing more than one word in the other language to be fully explained, and that's why the board uses slashes like that. Plus, once again, it all adds to the uncertainty of how this all works, Neither you nor the characters have a complete understanding of this world. The section in the ashtray maze is also pretty good. The song that played really amplified what was happening on screen, and the use of a dynamic song that changed what section was playing depending on where you were in the maze worked wonderfully to not disrupt the pacing of it all. I wasn't expecting anything like it, but coupled with the trippy and mind-bending architecture, it really was something. Too bad that they had to ruin it somewhat by having Jesse self-congratulate the developers for it. Yeah, Jesse, I know that was cool. You didn't need to tell me. To conclude this review, Control is a pretty good game. I thoroughly enjoyed it and was pleasantly surprised by what it had to offer, despite its shortcomings. I hope you enjoyed this review, and in case you disagree with something I said, let me know. I'd be happy to talk about it in the comments and see some different opinions on the game. I'm glad that the game had my mind going so hard that I just had to write something about it. I think that alone speaks for the game itself. So that's all. Bye.